Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining. Happy to have you here today. We'll go ahead and get started. This is the last webinar of the three-part webinar series that on the Salt Seafood Comprehensive Traceability Principles and Pathway. My name is Jenny Barker, and I am the Executive Director of Fishwise, and I'll be moderating today's webinar. We had more than 200 people register for this webinar series, and we're excited to see all of the interest. We are in webinar mode today, so please offer your questions via the Q&A box. If you look on the panel, you'll see it right in the middle, and we'll be monitoring that Q&A box throughout the webinar. As you may have just heard, we will be recording this session for those who couldn't attend. And we have a lot to share with you today, and we're really excited to have you here. As I said, my name is Jenny Barker, and I'm the former Chief of Party for the Seafood Alliance for Legality and Traceability, or SALT, which is a public-private partnership between the United States Agency for International Development, the Packard Moore and Walton Family Foundations. It's implemented by Fishwise, which is a sustainable seafood consultancy. But in February of this year, I took on a new role as Executive Director of Fishwise, but I'm excited to come back to SALT today to support SALT's webinar series in their final year. A little bit about this webinar series. In the past 5.5 years, SALT has brought people together worldwide to share learnings, create opportunities, break down barriers, and build a new narrative that demonstrates ecological, social, and economic benefits of implementing electronic traceability systems. One of SALT's most notable achievements was developing the comprehensive traceability principles and pathway for seafood. The principles were created in collaboration with 35 stakeholders from 18 countries to support governments and stakeholders to initiate, design, and implement comprehensive traceability programs. This is the last webinar of the three-part webinar series designed to provide both conceptual and technical details of the traceability principles. To date, we've offered many introductory sessions on the principles, but our aim with this webinar series is to show what it looks like to put the principles into practice. Our goal is to help drive further success in your traceability journey, wherever you may be on that journey. During part one of the webinar series, we provided specific case studies on how to engage stakeholders when designing traceability systems. For part two, we discussed challenges and opportunities for digitizing traceability, such as achieving interoperability and addressing verification. If you weren't able to participate or miss those previous webinars, the recordings are available on SALT's website and YouTube channel, and you will receive an email from SALT following this webinar where we'll share those links to those recordings. Today, we'll be talking about another two of the 6 traceability principles that are critical for the execution and long-term success of electronic traceability programs. Building a lasting and scaling program first, and then maximizing ecological, social, and economic benefits. Implementing a traceability program requires multi-stakeholder collaboration and resources to support the long-term success of the project. And without the right support and strategy, these projects often struggle to expand beyond the pilot phase. To create buy-in from stakeholders in a manner that improves the chances of the long-term project success, traceability implementers need to identify and maximize the ecological, social, and economic benefits of electronic traceability programs. Now I'm excited to introduce today's contributors. We have a fantastic lineup today for those who will be able to speak about the depth of the technical aspects of scaling and maximizing the triple benefits we highlighted. Today, you'll hear from Nina Rosen, who's a senior project manager with SALT and Fishwise. Nina has been leading SALT's project in Tanzania, and she's also worked with IFT Global Food Traceability Center to create a resource for scaling traceability projects. Nala Achi is a senior project manager from Fishwise's Social Responsibility Division. Nala brings her social responsibility expertise to the panel today, discussing the role and limitations of traceability to support human and labor rights. Kate O'Rourke, who's now SALT's chief of party, will provide a quick demo of the Benefits Evaluator for Seafood Traceability, or the BEST tool. SALT worked with FutureFish to create this tool, which helps traceability practitioners to measure and evaluate the effectiveness of their traceability programs in harnessing those social, ecological, and economic benefits. Following SALT's presentations, we will hear from our local partners from Asia. Fareed Maroof is a seafood supply chain technology, fisheries traceability, private sector engagement specialist on USAID's Sustainable Fish Asia Tech Support, or SUFIA project. Fareed will share learnings from scaling traceability projects in Indonesia. And Tan Thi Hien, co-founder of and vice director of the Center for Marine Life Conservation and Community Development, or MCD, will share key findings from the gap analysis they recently conducted to compare the current traceability landscape in Vietnam with the traceability principles. We have recorded some of our presentations today because we want to make sure that there are no connectivity issues overall. And because of the time difference, Mr. Maroof and Ms. Hien are not able to join for the live Q&A session, but you can please feel free to send your questions in the Q&A box during those presentations, and we'll make sure to follow up with them directly. Following the Q&A, we'll share an exciting update from our project in Tanzania. And last but not least, we're excited to welcome Jenny Kane for closing remarks. Jenny is the Senior Biodiversity and Natural Resources Advisor in USAID's Center for Environment, Energy, and Infrastructure. She leads USAID's engagement in SALT and provides leadership on fisheries and food security, the integration of climate change and biodiversity, and promoting equity and inclusion in the environment sector at USAID. We have a lot to cover, so let's get started. Thank you again for being here today. We're happy to have you. Nina, I will turn it over to you to get started.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm excited to have everyone gathered again to dive into SALT's comprehensive traceability principles. And today's session will take a closer look at 2 of the 6 principles, specifically focused on achieving comprehensive benefits and a long-lasting scalable program. So there are 6 guiding principles for improving or implementing comprehensive and electronic traceability programs. The word comprehensive just means that these principles are structured to achieve ecological, social, and economic benefits. And if you'd like more background information on how these principles were developed or why we've oriented them to be comprehensive, I really urge you to take a listen to the first webinar of this series following today's session. First, I'll explore how the principles and pathway guide us to build a lasting and scalable program. The ideas and resources presented in this principle showcase the importance of planning for longevity from the beginning of a traceability journey. From the onset of a project, generating and maintaining support for the program will be crucial to allow for the project to expand beyond the pilot phase. We've heard of the proliferation of pilot projects, but this principle is meant to help guide these projects into long-term programs that are institutionalized, funded, and have multi-stakeholder buy-in. Then I will pass the mic to my colleague Nala, who will dive into the activities described in the principle that aims to maximize the return of comprehensive benefits with an electronic catch documentation and traceability program. So I just mentioned this idea of a traceability journey, and by this I mean something pretty specific. A journey that includes 3 phases: the initiate, design, and implement phase. And SALT created a pathway to help put the guidance from the principles into action and to support users wherever they are on their journey towards seafood traceability. The 2 principles we're focused on today mostly fall within the design and implement phase of the pathway. However, this journey is not meant to be linear, so some may be at different stages and will prioritize different activities along the pathway that are needed to fit your program's objectives. So let's begin with the initiate phase. And what you're seeing here on the slide are the pathway activities included in this initiate phase. But you may be curious as to why I'm showing you all these activities when none of them are signed to that globe symbol representing the build a lasting and scalable program principle. Although we are focusing on these principles individually in this webinar series, in practice, the principles function best when they are mutually reinforcing and informing each other. The activities in the initiate phase will inform and build the foundation for a work plan to design and implement a program with clear objectives that takes into account political will, stakeholder engagement and buy-in, as well as funding. It's important to think long-term from the onset of the program. So you'll see in the initiate phase we focus a lot on being inclusive and collaborative with stakeholders and analyzing current system and programs in place. While conducting these activities, considering potential challenges such as budget availability, political support, and identifying strengths, as well as coordinating with the established institutions and efforts can all help to build a long-lasting and scalable program. Now, as we move to the design phase, we suggest identifying a pilot site before establishing a full national program for all seafood products. So there can be many learnings that can be gained with a pilot project. When thinking about identifying the pilot site, it's best to pick a site that can inform the future larger program. So siloed efforts and projects can really hinder the cohesive nationwide electronic catch documentation traceability, or ECDT, program. And I'm going to give you an example of how we really put this pathway activity into action with the conversations we had during the application of the principles and pathway in Tanzania. The conversations that happen when you consult stakeholders early, often and repetitively are crucial for this specific pathway activity. Over the last year, as I said, SALT has been working in collaboration with the government of Tanzania, specifically the Ministry of Livestock and Fisheries, to improve their existing traceability system for a small-scale octopus fishery. From the moment this opportunity arose, conversations began between SALT, USAID's mission in Tanzania, and the ministry to discuss goals, priorities, and objectives at the initiation of the project in order to identify the pilot site. Conversations like this allowed us to all understand and then balance the motivations to make sure that the outcomes of the project can inform the future larger effort along all of the coastal waters of Tanzania. Ultimately, we determined that the octopus fishery in the Kilwood district was of interest and would be the focus of the project. And ultimately, a memorandum of understanding was signed between the Ministry of Livestock and Fisheries and SALT to make sure that that collaboration was maintained throughout the project. Continuing to the design phase, there's an activity that encourages the policy adoption and development to strengthen ECDT support at a governmental level. This is crucial for the longevity and expansion of a national program because it can strengthen that political will, provide an avenue for national funding, and then build capacity for monitoring and enforcement. In the case of the Tanzania project, there was already established fishery regulations as well as some that were currently being drafted. This provided a timely opportunity to incorporate ECDT into the regulatory framework. And like I said, other activities associated with the principles will be helpful in order to identify the opportunities for improvement in policies, such as a gap analysis of current policies in place to identify where things can be adapted and changed versus what needs to be a new policy. Also being inclusive and collaborative to make sure that you have people who can really champion the program and build that political buy-in. Now to the million-dollar question, how much will all of this cost? And the truth is that will change on a case-by-case basis and dependent on existing infrastructure, the design of your program, and other contextual factors. To make sure that you think through all the pieces that need funding, Future of Fish compiled a tool to understand the cost of traceability technology implementation, including some aspects that can be easy to overlook, such as capacity building or communication and outreach, ongoing management, and troubleshooting. The points you see on this slide are examples of recommendations we provided in the Tanzanian context. As you can see, these steps still require the project to be inclusive and collaborative in order to identify the people we need to dedicate to fund development, and also those that need to be consulted because of their expertise in the technical components of a traceability program. It's also worth noting that when planning for long-term programs, it's helpful to still have those short-term goals to keep progress moving forward. Part of the principles and pathway guidance is to share relevant resources. And during the creation of this online platform, we noticed the amount of relevant resources for this principle was lacking. So the resources that are included in the resource library include guidance from other sectors like health, which can still be relevant to the seafood sector. One of the reasons that there may not be as many case studies to draw upon is because it's hard to bring a project to scale, especially a traceability program. And if there is a successful case, it may not always be documented. To help bolster this principle, SALT partnered with the Institute of Food Technologists Global Food Traceability Center to gather more information by hosting interviews and capturing some of the learnings both on paper as well as through these interviews. As IFT staff describes in their Q&A with SALT, through their research and interview process, they heard time and again how significant resources and effort were put into the planning and execution of a pilot that ended once that initial funding was exhausted. And when you're considering the scale and complexity of implementing a national strategy or national traceability initiative, it's clearly difficult to emulate many of the factors in a pilot setting, such as the enforcement, the level of effort needed to educate and train stakeholders, and continuous funding for maintenance and support. This new resource presented in the form of a type of checklist to help governments, partnering designers, and implementers ask the right questions to help prevent from falling into the previous pitfalls from other projects. IFT concludes, ultimately, a challenge with long-term programs is the ever-changing space of seafood traceability. It's important to plan to review and update programs to reflect market requirements, country-specific priorities, global standards, and technological advances. The development of this resource and its addition to the principles is an example of how the principles and their associated pathway are also not meant to be stagnant guidance. SALT is continuing to collect notes and reflections from our application projects like the one in Tanzania to inform future revisions. Currently, SALT plans to release, excuse me. As I was saying, currently SALT plans to release its first update to the principles and pathway later this year. And we welcome your feedback and suggestions if you notice anything that could be improved or added. So now I'm excited to introduce Nala Achi, Senior Project Manager with Fishwise's Social Responsibility Team, to further explain our next principle to maximize ecological, social, and economic benefits. Thank you.
Thank you, Nina. So the second principle we're exploring today is focused on understanding the ecological, social, and economic aspects of the ECDT program in order to maximize benefits using a comprehensive approach. So a seafood traceability program that is comprehensive means it uses captured data to take advantage of three potential benefits: ecological, social, and economic. So this entails implementing an ECDP program that yields comprehensive benefits, including improved data for improved fisheries management, the ecological piece, reduce risks of human rights and labor abuses in seafood supply chains, the social piece, and efficiencies in compliance with seafood import requirements, the economic piece. So I'm going to briefly walk through the pathway steps specific to this principles. And as with other principles, there are three main phases to applying the principle and building an ECDT program: initiate, design, and implement. And before I dive in, I briefly want to touch on some of the challenges of using data to address human and labor rights abuses in seafood supply chains. So while traceability and data can help identify risks of human and labor rights issues, there are challenges based on data quality and data privacy considerations to protect workers. So the bottom line is that it's essential to verify data and understand working conditions by engaging workers directly and elevating worker voice. And issues can only be addressed through effective grievance mechanisms and remedy. And last year, human and labor rights experts overwhelmingly determined that the most important piece of labor-specific data be collected at scale to assess risk is whether or not workers are represented by an independent trade union or a representative worker organization, and whether they have the legally protected right to join such organizations. And our former colleague, Amy McGann, created a blog on this research and this convening, so we'll share the link in the chat. So now that I've talked about some of the challenges related to traceability, data, and human and labor rights, I'd like to dig into the application of this principle. So for the initiate phase, applying this principle requires gathering economic data to prepare for cost-benefit analysis. So this entails collecting baseline data of costs involved with the current fisheries management program, including food safety and regulatory compliance, and setting expectations around a feasible return on investment, as financial returns may take time to manifest. And it's important to keep a comprehensive lens when thinking about this. So considering things like existing monitoring, enforcement, or verification and audits. And this could require talking to different groups that focus on human and labor rights, which ties to my next point. The next activity, which is being inclusive and identifying stakeholders, is actually listed under a different principle, the principle being be inclusive and collaborative with stakeholders. But I want to touch on this activity from a social responsibility perspective. And as Nina noted earlier, these principles really mutually reinforce each other. So it's important to think about being inclusive when conducting other pathway activities. So what does being inclusive and identifying stakeholders look like? This includes identifying if the program will impact marginalized and disenfranchised stakeholders, including migrant workers, women, and youth, and taking steps to include them. And the United Nations Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, which are also known as the UNGPs, provide helpful guidance on identifying and engaging stakeholders, including in the context of building systems to improve traceability and transparency in supply chains. And to learn more about how to meaningfully engage workers, you can also visit RISE, or the Roadmap for Improving Seafood Ethics, and specifically the Worker Engagement Foundation, which provides guidance on this topic. So now moving on to the design phase. For this phase, applying the principle requires identifying how worker welfare and well-being will be monitored and supported. So this entails identifying governing agencies that have jurisdiction over data related to worker welfare, as well as data security issues. And then it also requires implementing safeguards to mitigate negative impacts of ECDT data collection on worker rights and privacy. So this entails consulting existing data privacy laws and identifying processes, accountability mechanisms, or new schemes for responding to privacy considerations and stakeholder or user concerns. And then it also requires identifying existing protocols for how to share social data with agencies that oversee worker information, and revise or create new protocols as needed to improve worker welfare outcomes. And as I mentioned briefly earlier, collecting data on people and supply chains can be tricky. So once again, you can reference RISE to learn more about how to do this appropriately and effectively. In addition, more and more research in the social responsibility space is highlighting the critical need for worker voices and experiences to be front and center in designing any systems meant to improve supply chains, including ECDT systems. So the Worker-Driven Social Responsibility Network, or WSR network, is a great resource to learn more about what worker representation of this sort looks like in practice. And finally, the last component of the design phase is designing an ECDT program to fit within the larger fisheries management program. So this will inform alignment decisions as well as help identify differences between the proposed ECDT program and the existing national strategy for fisheries management. And it's really essential to align data collection with stock assessments and to integrate with existing fisheries management plans to ensure sustainable fishery management and promote biodiversity conservation. And now, before moving on to the next and final step, I'd like to dive in a little more to the topic of collecting data to support worker welfare and well-being. I'd like to share some key findings from SALT's previous work. Back in 2021, SALT partnered with Judy Gerhardt at the Accountability Research Center at the American University and Rainer Braun at the Institute for the Study of Human Rights at Columbia University to identify key considerations when aiming to monitor human rights in seafood supply chains. And we'll show some of the work in that. But so Judy and Rainer did initial research for this project, and they determined that certain KDEs, which are already currently being collected, such as the Seafood Import Monitoring Program, or SIMP, and the Global Dialogue on Seafood Traceability, or GDST, could be used to help identify human and labor rights risks. And these KDEs are fisher time at sea, because if fishers are at sea for long periods of time, they're isolated and they don't have access to organizations that could help if there's a problem. Vessel owner record, because this can be useful to understand the reputation of a vessel owner and whether the vessel or vessels that the owner owns have been associated with prior human and labor rights allegations. Flags flown, because some vessels may fly the flag of a country other than the country of ownership, sometimes in order to face fewer regulation. So there are flags of convenience. And then transshipment, because this means fishers sometimes that are forced to stay at sea for years on end, since vessels can be refueled by carrier vessels and offload their catch. VMS or AIS interruptions, and VMS and AIS are systems that transmit the location of vessels. So when there are interruptions, that can sometimes vessels want to hide illegal activity. And then catch quantity, because this can give a clue to how long fishers are working, although as with all of these KDEs, there are a lot of factors at play. So none of these can be taken at face value, but they can help inform an assessment of risk. And then Judy and Rainer also provided a list of KDEs to be considered for inclusion in future traceability systems. So these include the existence of a grievance mechanism that includes remedy and is trusted and used by workers, connectivity on the vessel that fishers have access to at least 90% of the time, fishers being represented by an independent trade union or worker organization, the existence of foreign migrant workers in the workforce. And this is important because research and media investigations have shown that foreign migrant workers are particularly vulnerable to human and labor rights issues. And finally, beneficial ownership, because requiring this information could help in understanding the connections among vessels under common ownership and be able to identify companies potentially responsible for abuses. And SALT hosted a webinar specific to this topic to share some of Judy and Rainer's findings and recommendations. And it's available on YouTube. So we'll also share the link to that in the chat. And finally, moving back to the application of the principle. So the last phase is the implement phase, which requires monitoring and evaluating the efficacy of the ECDT program by analyzing data to determine if ecological, social, and economic objectives are being met. So for the ecological component, this requires evaluating whether data is accessed timely and analyzed usefully for fisheries management. So it's important to ensure necessary agencies have clear data flows for more efficient fisheries management. For the social component, this entails assessing the benefits, limitations, and challenges of the program in relation to equity and worker welfare. So that involves analyzing worker participation in the creation and implementation of the ECDT program, as well as tracking and resolving concerns raised from workers regarding the program's efficacy and privacy. And key to these activities is building effective operational level grievance mechanisms and remedy systems to ensure that workers have the ability to raise issues and inform changes or improvements to implementation. And the OECD due diligence guidance for responsible business conduct provides helpful information on building systems to track and resolve concerns from workers. So that's a great resource to reference. And finally, for the economic component, applying this principle requires documenting costs of the ECDT program, implementation, and project costs of long-term operation. So this involves conducting cost-benefit analysis or return on investment or ROI studies using the collected baseline economic data. So that was a lot of information. To close off this section of the presentation, I'd like to reiterate that the principles that Nina and I just presented on are just 2 of 6 principles and their associated pathway steps, which can guide practitioners towards the implementation of a comprehensive ECDT program. And they're meant to be incorporated into an iterative process that allows for continued monitoring and evaluation so that the program can be adapted to meet the needs of governments and companies as priorities may shift over time. So thank you so much. And now I'm excited to pass the mic to Kate O'Rourke, SALT Chief of Party, to provide a quick demo of the Benefits Evaluator for Seafood Traceability, or BEST tool. Thank you.
I'm here to share a new tool from SALT with each of you. Have you ever wondered what benefits you could garner from an ECDT program? Then how you would know if they are manifesting? The BEST tool is here for you. Hi, I'm Kate O'Rourke, Chief of Party for SALT, and I'd like to take the next few minutes to share the BEST tool with you. Figuring out where to start maximizing the ecological, social, and economic benefits from an ECDT program might be the hardest part. The BEST tool shares not only what benefits you can garner through your ECDT program, but how to determine if those benefits are being realized. It serves as a guide for traceability practitioners, helping them measure and evaluate the effectiveness of ECDT programs in harnessing social, ecological, and economic benefits. SALT partnered with Future of Fish and Helen Packer to develop the BEST tool. You can find it on the SALT website in our Dive Deeper resources or through the search function. Let's go over to the tool now. Once you get to the tool, you'll find 3 pop-ups. The first is the BEST instructions and definitions. There you can find a glossary of terms, as well as the 6-step process for using the BEST. The next button is the BEST case study. This is a hypothetical case study of a government official using the BEST tool to achieve better estimates of IUU from his program. Finally, there's a survey here for provide your feedback. Take a look at the survey, provide feedback on how you've used the BEST tool or feedback to improve it. We look forward to hearing from you there. Now let's jump into the actual tool. By entering specific details about your ECDT program and these 4 filters, the BEST tool, such as hardware, software, KDEs, benefits, and outcomes, the tool generates a downloadable monitoring and evaluation plan tailored to your ECDT program. Let's generate a monitoring and evaluation plan together. So you'll start with benefit type. Here, I'll select all because I would like to develop a comprehensive ECDT program that achieves ecological, economic, and social benefits. I'll select OK. Next, I'll look at what outcomes I'd like to see from my ECDT program. Here, I'm interested in improved staff management, cost savings, and an improved ability to rapidly identify red flags indicating potential violations of human or labor rights risks. I'll select OK. Next, you'll take a look at the hardware or software in your ECDT program. Please select all the software or hardware you are using. I will select eLogbook, cameras, and VMS. The last filter is for you to input the metrics or key data elements you're collecting through your ECDT program. Here, I'll select all because I would like to know from the monitoring evaluation plan if there's additional metrics or KDEs I should be considering. I'll select OK. From there, you'll go to this button over here, which is Export. I'll export as an Excel file. Let me move over to the Excel file for each of you quickly. And here is the monitoring evaluation plan that was just downloaded from the BEST tool. This shows the benefit types you selected, the outcomes you're wishing to achieve, the hardware or software you plan to use, the specific KDEs you will need to collect in your program to achieve those benefits, the metric and evaluation criteria for how to evaluate if you're achieving those benefits, and the actions that you should take based on how that metric is working or not for your program, and the frequency of data capture, how often you should look at this data point to see how your program is doing. So this plan helps to identify the relevant information to collect, determines the optimal timing for that data collection, and suggests evaluation methods. By utilizing this plan, you can effectively assess the performance of benefits within your program. I encourage all users to adapt the monitoring evaluation plan provided by the BEST tool to suit your unique circumstances and needs. Thank you for joining me, and I hope you'll take a look at the BEST tool. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Farid Maruf. I have been fortunate to work in the field of seafood traceability in the Southeast Asia region and Pacific since 2016. During this time, I had the opportunity to manage several pilot projects in Indonesia, Philippines, Thailand, and Vietnam. In doing so, I have had worked closely with fisheries managers, value chain actors, technology and service providers, as well as NGO donors and multilateral organizations. Based on my experience on the field, I would like to share some noteworthy findings that have the potential to support scalability in the seafood traceability initiatives. Lastly, I would also like to share some updates in the Philippines and Indonesia. What kind of stakeholder involvement that can scale up the traceability program beyond the pilot? I think it should start with engaging your stakeholder early. Early stakeholder engagement is crucial to ensure scalable ECDT system. It helps gather requirements, identify challenges, mitigate risks, foster ownership, and manage expectations effectively. This collaborative approach laid the foundation for successful and scalable system. Here you can see we engage with stakeholders from the government during the design. We accommodate all their thoughts, their findings. And this information we gather and put into the design. Engaging stakeholders also can be done during the prototyping and testing the application. How to leverage this learning from pilot project to larger traceability programs? clear cost-benefit study and evidence should be available. Articulating benefit origins and quantifying them in the monetary terms are both vital for businesses. This helps understand the cost of ownership and calculate ROI, return of investment. This practice enhances transparency, credibility, and enable informed decision making. By identifying contribution factors, stakeholders are empowered to replicate successful approaches and leverage these sources of value for optimal outcomes. Policy advocacy by private sectors and NGO. For businesses, the presence of consistent enabling policy is paramount. Such a policy framework provides a stable, predictable environment that supports business operation and foster growth. Thus, concerted policy advocacy by private sector and NGO and academia are important. Empowering the first movers group. First movers is a community of the willing that consists of representatives from government, private sectors, NGO, fishery experts who are committed to drive and promoting ECDT. This is an example of first movers group that we established in the Philippines. This first movers group consists of 13 companies, consists of fishing and processing companies in the General Santos area. During the development, we engaged with this group, including their operators, their administrators, their salesperson, and their finance people. They will test this application, they provide feedback to the developers. Alright, let's talk about the updates and new development related to the National Traceability Program that happened in Indonesia and Philippines lately. The new development in the Philippines related to the National Traceability Program. BIFAR Fishery Administrative Order FAO 251 regarding traceability has been revised to accommodate electronic CDTS. BIFAR National Director issued memorandum on 8 March 2022 regarding the implementation of eCDTS in BIFAR 12. eCDTS is incorporated within AFM in the upcoming World Bank funded project, Fisheries and Coastal Resilient Resources Planning and Management, FISCRM. Recently, the new Marcos administration suspended the enforcement of FAO 266, which required commercial fishers to report their catch to vessel monitoring measures (VMM) and electronic reporting system. This is a setback. I hope it's just temporarily. In Indonesia, Ministry of Marine Affairs and Fisheries (MMIF) has number of applications that serve some nodes or function of traceability. However, there's still yet any connected and integrated system that collect data from upstream to the market. However, we're going to talk about two major applications, Stellina and Logbook, that they were launched during our Ocean Conference in 2018. The first application is Stellina. Stellina is downstream traceability system that collect data from landing to the market, including domestic market. Stellina has been piloted in a number of main export-oriented ports in Indonesia. It's backed by Ministerial Decree Permen KP number 29, 2021. MDPI is working with MMIF to build Stellina and traceability interoperability. Stellina also developing open API to enable the system to receive other data from different systems. Advanced analytic and reporting also under development. Implementation is still under voluntary participation scheme. Stellina facing significant challenge due to the lack of tangible benefit it offers to supply chain actors. This drawback is further compounded by the voluntary nature of the initiative, leading to the reluctance among potential participants. Nevertheless, there's two companies currently are participating full implementation of Stellina. The second application in Indonesia that we're gonna discuss is the e-logbook. E-logbook currently backed by ministerial decree and mandatory for vessel above 5 gross ton. E-logbook are required for selling permit and license extension. These requirements force the e-logbook adoption even further. E-logbook intended as a basis for collecting government levies, contributing to the non-tax income. Also planned to be used for the catch quotas for the measurable fisheries policies. E-logbook data can be utilized for reviewing and formulating fisheries regulation, implementation of e-logbook can be considered as one of the largest in the region, if not in the world. Currently, it activated by almost 13,000 vessels in 60 ports. This demonstrates a commitment of MMIF to modernize fisheries management and promoting transparency in the industry. Since inception in 2018, e-logbook system has successfully recorded close to 100,000 trips. Over the past 4 years, there's been a notable increases in the portion of fishing reports submitted using e-logbook compared to the traditional paper book method. You can see the orange bars getting taller and taller here. This shift signifies the growing adoption and recognition of the benefit offered by e-logbook system in terms of accuracy, efficiency, and data management. This is some of the use cases of the e-logbook. Can be used to calculate MSY as a source of upstream traceability, compliances, quota calculation, and so forth. E-logbook challenges: data quality and verification. There's definitely room for improvement for coherent data verification. Access to consolidated data by users. At the moment, users only receive acknowledgement when they submit their data. Of course, it comes with cache detail. However, they cannot access their historical data and time series data. Interoperability. Like other systems, this system is still a closed system. No other system can submit data to e-logbook. The interoperability features actually could spur the adoption of e-logbook more. Data link or connectivity with other applications within MMIF. Still lacking the data connection with other systems that participate in traceability. Changing of champion. Quite often, this kind of initiative led by individuals that later on get promoted or move to other location. When this person left, the initiative sometimes fail to receive similar attention or priority. That's all for the updates from me. So I hope it provides you some information. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Thân Thị Hiền. I am currently working for MCD, the Center for Marine Conservation and Community Development, a non-state and non-profit actor in Vietnam. So today I am very pleased to share with you the ECT overview and the key highlight of our gap and also recommendation for the improvement of ECT in Vietnam based on our experiential learning and also the comprehensive principle of ECT. So MCD is implementing partner of SOL in Vietnam since 2020. And we are also the non-profit actor. We have already established in Vietnam for the last 20 years, working on the fishery program, including the VMS and ECT pilot project, fishery labor safety, gender equity, and climate change adaptation. So as you may know that Vietnam is a tropical country in the Southeast Asia region, where the fishery is also developed livelihood of many who are dependent on the fishery resources for their livelihoods. So fishery is also multi-species in Vietnam, including the highly valued for exported product like tuna. This 44% is exported to the USA, blue swimming crabs, octopus, and other species. In Vietnam, we have a legal framework for the fishery management, including the fishery law 2017 and the circular 21. That is the key high level of policy and regulation for the IU fishing and catch documentation quality in Vietnam. Since 2018, with participation of key actors including MCD, Pinatuna, Sipdet, and D-Fish. This demonstration has shown the technology is quite good and available for the user groups, including the fishermen, including the collector and processor and trader. And based on our piloting and also the key principle guided by the SOL, so we have also identified some of our gap in ECT in Vietnam as a generals. So first, we found that the most ECT comprehensive principles are relevant to Vietnam. And we found some gap in the step and also from the designing to implementation and initiating, including the from our observation, we found that the participation of the national and the local government is very important. And the role of the non-state actor like MCD in the monitoring ECT system is also required for making sure that the program is running well and we can share some of our outcome and output to the government and key stakeholders. One of the principles of the ECT is to maximize the ecological, social, economics benefits. But in Vietnam, we think that for the social issue, including the labor rights and also labor safety, we did some interview with the fishermen and we do some research, but we not touch upon on the ECT because it is quite another programs and it charged by another department. And therefore, we need dialogues on the ECT and labor issues monitoring in Vietnam and also in the system of ECT, we think there are some ECT system, but still not run by the private sector. This is very important because we think that the local government, the national government is still in charge for the ECT development as the center for the initiative in Vietnam. And during the implementation, we think that the challenge is also in the cost-benefit analysis or estimation about the ECT in Vietnam as overall and as specifically in terms of demonstration. So that's why it's still challenge in the scaling up of the ECDT's good practices in Vietnam. So through the analysis of the key principle and the progress and our gap analysis, we found that the principle of building a lasting and scalable program is also very important and create program that electronics interoperation and data security is also very important. In Vietnam, we have a VN Fish Bay, and we want to standardize and synchronize the data of ECT and e-logbook and VMS together into the central hub in Vietnam. And you need more capacity for the implementation. So as I mentioned before, we have some opportunity and challenges, and we want to provide some recommendation from our observation and learning experience in Vietnam. So first, very important is the Vietnamese government should develop an updated roadmap and national guideline for the ECT implementation, include towards a comprehensive principle and designing the EC system that has a backbone system that can be interoperable and data security, and also address the specific needs from the local implementation. And as I mentioned before, that we need the more technical support for the human capacity in Vietnam in terms of managing and monitoring the ECT data to make sure that it can be have a more analysis and verification for the decision-making process. So one of the recommendation is also important regarding to the supply chain development in Vietnam. Even we have some initiative for the enhancing the value chain across the actor in the between the actor across the supply chain, but we think that we need more efforts in terms of the link between the supply chain and the technology, so that it can have a more maximizing the benefit for the value chain actor and increase the benefit from the fishermen and other actor in the value chain. And finally, we think that about the possibility, the platform or network in Vietnam to enhance the cooperation between the different stakeholders. We have an engagement more the private sector, the fishing community, the central and local fishery agency is very important to have more consensus and also consistent in terms of developing of ECT system in Vietnam. So we would like to thank you very much, Sol, and also the Department of Fishery, Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development in Vietnam, who are also supporting our work in Vietnam. So thank you very much for your attention.
Hi, welcome back. That was a lot of really lovely and rich information. I want to thank all of our speakers for giving us really practical insights into how to utilize the principles, for learning about new tools, and learning about how these important principles are being utilized in the field. It really gives clear indication of what it looks like in practice to apply these principles and in real life. So there have been a few questions in the Q&A box. I encourage you to continue to submit those questions and just share, and we'll want to have a bit of a dialogue. We have a couple of our presenters here on the call live. I see Nina, thanks for coming off. I think Nala is here as well. And would love to really address a couple of the questions that we've had presented, one of them to Nina, one of them to Nala. Nina, first, what did the research with IFT find that was commonly a misstep that can help build a scalable program? Very much so oriented with that last question.
Yeah, and it's interesting. It's nice to actually see some alignment in what IFT was finding, and then also what we heard from Fareed, and then what we just saw as some of the results in the poll. A couple pieces to that answer is, one is that pre-project communication was highlighted in IFT's research as something that is often a misstep, where you're going straight to the solution without first consulting with the stakeholders involved. they heard examples of a landing site being built where people aren't necessarily landing their boats, right? So where it's like, this is the solution, but not necessarily meeting the needs of what's actually happening in the supply chain. So that's one piece. And Fareed mentioned that as well, is that, communication with stakeholders early on in the project really can help start building that buy-in and letting them be a part of the solution so that it fits the needs. Second piece is, these pilot projects often showcase the technical capability of a project, but not necessarily the system-wide feasibility of the project. So planning during the design phase, what enforcement look like? What does fees and fines? So some of these more technical aspects that are often overlooked that are really important for that long-term, especially at a government level buy-in, to start thinking about those sooner on in the pilot project so that there's something established when the pilot is finished.
Great, thank you, Nina. And again, just encourage you, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A. We'll be happy to answer them. We do have another one for Nala. And the question is, directly engaging with workers can be challenging, especially in the early stage of stakeholder engagement. Who do you think can represent workers, or how do we best identify those key stakeholder groups?
Yeah, thank you. This is a great question. My initial response to this would be, if there are trade unions or labor unions or representative worker organizations on the ground, those would definitely be the best and first places to engage workers directly. However, there are definitely certain geographies where having trade unions or representative worker organizations isn't possible. And in those cases, I think reaching out to on the ground civil society or nonprofit organizations that do work with workers is a great place to start. If there are worker-driven social responsibility type models already existing in those supply chains, then there might also be worker committees that you could engage with. So definitely dependent on the context, but if there are unions or existing worker organizations, start there. If not, then contacting on the ground civil society and other nonprofit organizations is a good place to start.
Great, thank you. Really useful information and important points for everyone to consider. With no more questions right now, I'm going to go ahead and move on to a bit more of an update about the Tanzania project you heard about a little bit before. And that is related to a new set of strategies that we developed related to the principles. And so some of you may have heard over the past year, SALT collaborated with a local partner in Tanzania called the Aqua Farms Organization, or AFO, and a senior technical advisor, Yahya Mgawe, to develop a strategy for that electronic traceability program in the Kilwa district, just south of Dar es Salaam, for their octopus fishery. And we utilize the traceability principles and pathways to do that work. So today we're excited to share the strategy that came of that. And I'm going to turn it back over to Nina, who led this project, and let her share a little bit more with you.
Hello, everyone. Nina again. And I had hinted at some of the work SALT had done in Tanzania in my last presentation, but I'd like to build more of a complete story to share how we really put these traceability principles into practice over the last year. And it was through a collaborative approach to meet the needs of the Tanzanian Ministry of Livestock and Fisheries and the interests of USAID that this project worked to improve transparency through seafood traceability. And to do this, we did apply the comprehensive traceability principles to the small-scale octopus fishery in Kilwood District. And by prioritizing the octopus fishery, it allows us to help support a broader conservation and livelihood goals. And as you can see, this project started in February 2022 and is wrapped up in March of this year. So it was a relatively short project. So we relied very heavily on in-country partnerships and collaborators for this to be a success. To reorient ourselves to the pathway, I wanted to just highlight that this project focused very much so on the initiate phase. And we began to enter parts of the design phase to create a strategy to guide the next steps of design and implementation of a comprehensive electronic catch documentation and traceability, or ECDT, program. And as I mentioned before, not all pathway steps may be of top priority for your project. And so in our case, the highlighted areas show that we really focused on activities that fell within the use data to inform decision-making and be inclusive and collaborative with stakeholder principles. A cost benefit analysis was not important, not as important in this project at the stage that we were in. And so we did not focus on this activity. However, that is not to say that as efforts continue, that the designers and implementers do not need to revisit this activity. And because the pathway is not linear, most of our efforts began by being inclusive with identifying stakeholders and engaging with them repetitively throughout the project. And this wouldn't have been possible without the help of our in-country partners, Aqua Farms Organization, or AFO, and technical advisor, Senior McGoway. We hosted webinars, meetings in appropriate language, such as Swahili, interactive workshops, local visits, in order to really understand the octopus fishery and make sure the right people were included in the conversation and in the development of the strategy. Just to give you an idea of the types of activities and results that were conducted in this initiate phase, I want to start with stakeholder mapping. And all of these efforts allowed AFO to really fully understand the landscape of the supply chain and who was involved in the octopus fishery. They analyzed information to create collaboration maps and a power versus interest matrix. And ultimately, all these tools were really helpful to guide stakeholder engagement and target specific groups that should be leveraged for the continued success of the project. This process also involves a lot of time listening and understanding the system, brainstorming, and validating with stakeholders in order to avoid assumptions. Building the stakeholder map also informed the gap analysis, which begins to touch on some of the activities included in the use data to inform decision-making. Taking into consideration the goals of the project, AFO identified gaps and opportunities important to consider for traceability improvements. For example, on the picture with the woman with a telephone, you'll see that I circled an application that's currently being used by managers to help collect catch information. This is an important finding because although most of traceability right now is paper-based, this highlights an existing infrastructure that might be able to be adapted for a broader traceability system instead of reinventing a new application or new process. Here we also began to further characterize the supply chain, which we later validated through our co-design event in September of last year. First, I want to start by establishing what I mean by co-design. It means to build something with the people who are affected by it. Co-design was a crucial step of our project where we began to enter this design phase of the pathway, and the findings from that convening ultimately informed the development of the strategy for the forthcoming design and implementation activities of the traceability development in Tanzania. I want to highlight that this design phase of the pathway is very important because it is really the only phase that includes all 6 principles and includes also 18 activities instead of the 10 associated activities with the initiate and implement phases. So this is why I want to be clear that, in this project, we did not design a new traceability program, but we helped to begin their journey in this design phase by hosting the co-design workshop in September 2022. This 3-day workshop included many group activities, and important to the design of the workshop, we wanted to have tables represent a multi-stakeholder group. So fishers, beach management unit members, local and national government representatives, processors, exporters, NGOs, researchers were all sitting at the table together in small groups. And it's important to consider power dynamics in this setting and really create a stage for all voices to be considered equally. This was the first meeting of its kind and proved to be very powerful for the participants. And so I'm going to put a link in the chat so that you can read more about some of the reflections of the participants in our SALT Story Hub piece. Activities during the co-design discussed the desired benefits of a future ECDT program, current challenges, as well as what type of information is important for their different roles along the supply chain. Special attention was also given to traceability information that would help reap those comprehensive benefits. So making sure that social considerations are also included. After the event, information was analyzed and informed the final recommendations for what a comprehensive ECDT program should consider. And ultimately, the project has culminated in the release of the Kilwa District Octopus Fishery Comprehensive ECDT Strategy, both in English and Swahili. And it's worth noting that the strategy also went through rounds of feedback to validate the findings and make sure that our recommendations really reflect what we heard during that co-design event. You'll see on the slide that there are different sections of the strategy where we discuss our approach and the current state of traceability in the fishery. But I do want to spend a couple minutes highlighting some of the nuances of the other sections that I think could be helpful for those interested in applying the principles in your own cases. So in section 3, the future of traceability, this is just a portion of the larger table, but it showcases the level of detail that we presented based on the desires of the stakeholders and current best practices in traceability. It shows who should be collecting certain data with check marks, as well as if there should be some special considerations such as timing or sample size with check marks and asterisks. I wanted to highlight that also worker safety was a really important piece of comprehensive traceability. And so because of this, there's a line that highlights worker safety data to be collected, such as injuries and/or deaths. The work plan priorities are all associated with specific principles. And this is really important because that way the user or implementer can go online, find its associated principle, and identify relevant resources that can help put these recommendations into action. And our final section of the strategy is very detailed, and it includes every pathway activity, what we did during the application project in Tanzania to date, as well as the future next steps. Again, just because we have implemented an activity of the pathway does not mean that there are no future considerations that need to be implemented. So again, it's not linear. We'll have to go back and revisit some steps throughout the process. Although this project has a specific goal to improve biodiversity and conservation and fisheries management in Tanzania, SALT will use the learnings from this application as well as others in Vietnam and the Latin American Caribbean region to improve the comprehensive traceability and principles and pathway guidance for future users like yourself. So thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Just wonderful work, and really happy to see the accomplishments of that work and application. So we're coming to a close. I'd like to welcome Jenny Kane, who leads USAID's engagement on SALT. She has been a great support to our work from the beginning, and we're really excited to have her do the closing remarks at this point. Jenny, over to you.
Thanks so much, Jenny. And folks, let me know if my visual isn't coming in well, but really excited to be able to close this out for all of you. As Jenny Barker just said, I'm Jenny Kane. I'm a Senior Biodiversity and Natural Resources Advisor at the U.S. Agency for International Development, or USAID, and that's the government agency that leads the U.S.'s international development and humanitarian efforts. And as said before, I've been USAID's lead for SALT for the past 5.5 years. We've heard from so many excellent presenters today, and I'm really thrilled to have a chance to join them and touch on the value of the traceability principles for USAID's work broadly. At USAID, we see fisheries as critically important to development goals, and that includes things like improved nutrition and food security, peace and stability, sustainable economic growth, women's empowerment, and biodiversity conservation. And many of you are familiar with facts like fisheries provide over 3 billion people with at least 20% of their protein, meaning that about half the world's population relies on fish for a significant portion of their diet. Fishing supports livelihoods and fuels economic growth as one of the most traded food products globally. And 30 million people around the world work in fisheries, and about 50% of seafood workers are women. But as you all also know, fisheries and the benefits they bring are being undermined by illegal, unreported, and unregulated, or IUU fishing, as we say, which makes this a priority issue across the US government. So what is USAID then doing in response? Well, we invest a bit more than 60 million each year to promote sustainable fisheries and conserve marine biodiversity in more than 20 countries, and roughly a third of these funds are used to counter IUU fishing. Over the last 8 years, USAID has placed a particular focus on expanding the use of comprehensive electronic catch documentation and seafood traceability as a key strategy for countering IUU fishing and strengthening fisheries management as well. And improving transparency and traceability is part of a broader holistic approach to countering IUU fishing that we take that also includes strengthening governance, enhancing enforcement, and building alliances across the public and private sectors, which is why in 2017, USAID partnered with the Walton Family Packard and more foundations to form SALT. And it's been really amazing to see the SALT community grow to over 1,900 active participants, and also to see the learning that's occurred through the hard work of Fishwise and so many other organizations that have participated in SALT. So as I've heard today, one of the most important pieces of SALT's work has been the collaborative development of these traceability principles. And that again was with expert NGO, industry, and government stakeholders from 17 countries. As Nina discussed, the principles in the accompanied pathway have provided a roadmap for seafood producing countries interested in designing and implementing comprehensive electronic catch documentation traceability programs that address those ecological, economic, and social goals. And the principles also are quickly becoming a tool for the global seafood community to apply these same best practices to traceability and build effective and scalable ECDT systems with that triple bottom line impact. Because many seafood producing countries are developing countries, the traceability principles have really been an important part of USAID's efforts to combat IUU fishing in the countries where we work. And so, as we just heard, SALT has applied the principles to strategy development in Tanzania, but also to technical assistance, assessments, and learning events in Mexico, Vietnam, Peru, and Ecuador. And I'll briefly say something about each of those. So in Mexico, the Comunidad y Biodiversidad, or COBI, used the SALT principles in the design of its mobile application Pesca Data. And COBI intends to make Pesca Data interoperable with other traceability systems throughout Latin America and the Caribbean. SALT's going to continue working with COBI to promote cooperation and also provide a basic level of technical assistance to ensure those principles are implemented as fully and effectively as possible. In Vietnam, SALT partnered with the Center for Marine Life Conservation and Community Development, or MCD, the Directorate of Fisheries of Vietnam, and the Vietnam Tuna Association. And with the Directorate of Fisheries endorsement, MCD conducted e-logbook pilots to tackle IUU fishing and inform Vietnam's fisheries management. MCD and Vietnam Tuna Association also conducted a gap analysis to help address the goals of comprehensive traceability initiatives And they'll hold a seafood traceability dialogue to share key findings from the analysis and also socialize the principles with the broader seafood community. In Peru, SALT supported consultants to the government of Peru's National Fisheries Health Agency, and the consultants used the principles to conduct a gap analysis of their traceability plan to determine if the principles, guidelines, and best practices were being followed. And next month, SALT and the UN Food and Agriculture Organization are jointly hosting a regional workshop in Ecuador to explore the role of fishing ports in traceability. So using guidelines and best practices from the FAO's Blue Ports Initiative and the traceability principles, participants are collectively evaluating critical points for improving seafood value chains and suggesting targeted solutions. So I'll close here and say, like, as you can see from these examples, the traceability principles have provided a guiding framework for improving transparency and traceability in seafood supply chains in a range of contexts and with stakeholders from both the public and private sectors. These efforts are continuing, and we're really looking forward to future applications. Of course, I have to say SALT and USAID especially is proud to have supported this work of SALT and the traceability principles alongside the Walton family, Packard and Moore foundations. And again, I thank you for the opportunity to share that with all of you today. USAID is really excited about this work. So now I'll turn back to Jenny to close this out.
Thank you, Jenny, and we really appreciate the partnership of USAID on this and all the support along the way. Thank you all for joining today. We have reached the end of our time. We will be sending you an email with the links to the presentation today, and hopefully a lot of the resources that were shared in the chat today. We look forward to sharing more with you as we come to an end as a project, but always feel free to send us emails and we're happy to answer any questions. Thank you again for your participation, and you'll see us soon. Thank you.